During the American president's visit, King Charles appeared to briefly lose his patience and even scolded a guard. The monarch seemed to try getting the president to wrap up a conversation, but when that didn't work, he turned his attention toward the guard in frustration. Last year, the world watched as King Charles fought a difficult battle with cancer. Buckingham Palace eventually released an official statement confirming the diagnosis. Against the odds, he pulled through, and many believed the worst was behind him. But now, something even more alarming has come to light. According to recent reports, the king may be facing another, more severe health issue, one that could be even more life-threatening than before. While the palace has yet to confirm the full details, sources close to the royal family say the new development is deeply concerning. And that's not the only surprise. In a twist that no one saw coming, King Charles is reportedly addressing a long-held rumor that many have quietly speculated about for years. What exactly did he reveal? Stay with us as we explore the king's most personal battle yet, and the revelation he's finally making. When the news broke that King Charles had cancer, people around the world showed their support. Despite continuing his weekly meetings with the Prime Minister and attending Privy Council sessions, he will now begin stepping back from some responsibilities. We'll soon be seeing more of Prince William and Queen Camilla taking on a greater share of royal duties. As messages of goodwill and prayers poured in, another unexpected story began to surface, one that took many by surprise. It involved Princess Diana. Though Diana passed away decades ago, her memory remains strong, and her name continues to be spoken with love and admiration. Now it seems King Charles is finally ready to address it. It's no secret that his treatment of Diana during their marriage sparked criticism. And as he now faces another serious health challenge, it appears he's beginning to reflect on those past actions. Reports suggest the king has opened up about his relationship with Diana, and his words have stunned many. So what exactly did he say? Let's take a look. To understand it all, we have to go back to the beginning, when Charles, Diana, and Camilla's story first began. Charles met Camilla at a polo match through a mutual friend. They clicked right away. She made him laugh, was warm and down to earth, and didn't act intimidated by his status. He was drawn to that. But then Charles left to serve in the Royal Navy, and the distance between them grew. While he was away, Camilla reconnected with Andrew Parker Bowles, someone she'd known for a long time. Many at the time believed Camilla wasn't a suitable choice for a future queen, and so her relationship with Charles came to an end. While Charles was deployed in the Caribbean, Camilla accepted Andrew's proposal. When Charles found out, he was devastated. He couldn't understand how something that felt so real and meaningful could end so suddenly. Camilla went on to marry Andrew Parker Bowles on July 4, 1973. Even though Charles protested, he and Camilla remained close friends after her wedding. Not long after, Prince Charles was introduced to Lady Diana Spencer. Diana was only 16 when they first met. Charles was struck by her bright personality and charm, even at such a young age. But it wasn't until the summer of 1980 that their relationship began to shift. They crossed paths again at a house party, and Charles started to view her differently, no longer as just a sweet teenager, but as someone he could seriously date. One evening, while sitting on a hay bale at a barbecue, Diana spoke softly to Charles about the recent loss of his great-uncle, Lord Mountbatten, who had been killed by the IRA. She expressed sincere sympathy and told him he deserved someone who would truly care for him. Her words came at a difficult time in Charles's life, and they struck a chord. But this wasn't actually their first meeting. Charles had met Diana back in 1977 when he was dating her older sister, Lady Sarah. He had visited the Spencer family home at Althorpe and found Diana to be cheerful, friendly, and fun to be around. Diana also attended Charles's 30th birthday celebration in 1978, and they spent a weekend together with the royal family at Sandringham in 1979. Over time, Charles would invite her to casual gatherings, dinners, sporting events, and the like, but it was always as friends. Diana was simply good company. Everything changed after their heartfelt conversation in 1980. That's when Charles began to see her in a new light. Wanting to spend more time with her, Charles invited Diana to Balmoral, where he was on summer holiday with friends and family. She made a great impression. People found her charming, warm, and full of energy. It seemed like she truly admired Charles, and everyone around him appreciated having her there. She appeared to be a perfect match for the prince. At the time, it was still expected that a future queen should be a virgin, come from aristocratic roots, and be a member of the Church of England. But by the 1980s, as dating norms evolved and society changed, women who met all those expectations were becoming rare. Diana, however, seemed to fit every one of them. She was young, joyful, innocent, and full of promise, the ideal bride on paper. But things didn't stay simple for long. So what happened? Everything changed once the media caught wind of their relationship. Charles had been followed by the press for years, with constant speculation about who he might marry. Now that he was seriously seeing Diana, public interest exploded, and the pressure on both of them only grew. Every woman Charles dated ended up under intense media scrutiny, which made dating incredibly challenging, and Diana experienced it firsthand. Once the press learned that Charles was seeing Diana, things quickly got out of hand. Reporters camped outside her London apartment, and photographers followed her everywhere. Overnight, she became a media sensation. With all that attention, it became nearly impossible for her and Charles to build a private relationship or spend time together like a normal couple. At the same time, Charles felt mounting pressure from his father, Prince Philip. By then, in his 30s, Charles was being pushed to stop dating around and settle down. The royal family needed an heir, and that responsibility weighed heavily on Charles. So, did Prince Philip actually tell him to marry Diana? It's a question people have asked for years. It all stems from a memo Prince Philip reportedly sent Charles in early 1981, telling him to make a choice: either marry Diana or end the relationship. But according to royal biographer Penny Junor, Charles misread the message. In the royal family, direct conversations were often replaced by formal letters or memos. Charles didn't take the note as advice. He took it as an order. Feeling cornered, he proposed to Diana just a few weeks later, on February 6, 1981, at Windsor Castle. But Junor describes the engagement as a tragic mismatch. At that point, Charles and Diana had barely spent any real time together. Diana would later admit they had only seen each other 13 times before the proposal, and most of those encounters weren't even private. In truth, they hardly knew one another. After the engagement, Diana's life changed dramatically, and not for the better. In a recently released extended interview clip, her reaction to the engagement is on full display. The idea of being in love clearly meant different things to each of them. At just 19, Diana left her happy, simple life in London, where she shared a flat with a few close friends, and moved into a suite of rooms at Buckingham Palace. It was a lonely and unfamiliar world. Suddenly, she was living in a vast, formal palace, far removed from the warmth and comfort of her previous life. According to Junor, Diana began to change almost immediately after moving in. She became more emotional and often upset. She would cry frequently and grew jealous when Charles spent time elsewhere. Her moods shifted constantly. The sudden fame and lack of personal space overwhelmed her, and it started to take a toll on her mental health. Charles, caught up in royal duties and public appearances, didn't understand what was happening. He seemed confused and unprepared to handle Diana's emotional struggles. Privately, Diana was dealing with severe mental health issues, including bulimia, an eating disorder. Conditions like bulimia and anorexia often reflect deep inner pain, where a person uses food to cope with emotional distress. In Diana's case, that pain reached back to childhood. She had a rocky upbringing. Her parents' marriage was troubled and ended in divorce when she was just 6 years old. That early trauma never truly left Diana. Even as a young adult, she carried emotional scars from her childhood. She struggled with bulimia for years before finally seeking professional help. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when the illness began, but according to royal biographer Penny Junor, it was already well underway by the time Diana and Charles left for their honeymoon. At first, doctors may have thought she was dealing with anorexia, but Junor notes that the eating disorder was just one symptom of a much deeper issue. Diana had been grappling with mental health challenges since she was a child. Bulimia became a way for her to cope with the emotional pain that had followed her for so long. Both bulimia and anorexia are serious, damaging conditions, difficult to live with and even harder to talk about. For a while, Diana kept her struggles private, but in 1992, her experiences became public through the book Diana, Her True Story, written by journalist Andrew Morton. Unknown to the public at the time, Diana had secretly worked with Morton to share her side of the story. In the book, and later in her own words, she revealed how isolated and misunderstood she had felt. "I'd like to be a queen of people's hearts," she once said, "but I don't see myself being queen of this country." Then, in her iconic 1995 Panorama interview with journalist Martin Bashir, Diana spoke openly about her bulimia and how deeply lost she often felt. According to Junor, Diana rarely believed anyone could truly help her. Though she regularly saw therapists, she also turned to alternative practices, like astrology and crystal healing, hoping to find some form of relief. But throughout all of it, Diana continued to struggle behind the scenes. Even as the world prepared for her so-called fairy tale wedding, the reality was far from magical. On July 29, 1981, Diana and Charles married at St. Paul's Cathedral in a ceremony watched by millions and labeled the wedding of the century. Yet beneath the surface, things were already unraveling. Junor suggests that both Charles and Diana may have known, deep down, that they were making a mistake. But stepping away from such a highly publicized royal wedding would have required immense strength, and neither of them felt able to do it. Charles had always believed in the idea that marriage should be forever, and despite not being in love with Diana, he hoped he could grow to love her over time and build a successful partnership. There's a common belief that Charles simply used Diana to fulfill his duty, to produce an heir and a spare, before returning to Camilla, the woman he had always loved. But Junor sees it differently. She argues that Charles never set out to hurt Diana. Instead, he found himself in a marriage that made both of them deeply unhappy. In the end, it was a tragic mismatch. Charles's relationship with Camilla had ended back in 1973 when she married Andrew Parker Bowles. At that point, she focused on being a wife and mother, and for some time she and Charles remained just friends. However, after the birth of her second child in 1978, their romantic relationship quietly resumed. In the 2.5 years since becoming king and queen, Charles and Camilla have completed 6 state visits, including the current one to Italy, which began this afternoon. But none of their previous trips have taken place during such a tense and divided time in global affairs. Camilla had always been more than just a friend to Charles. She was his closest confidant, and for a time, once again, his lover. Their rekindled relationship lasted until Charles became engaged to Diana in 1981. Camilla's own marriage was unhappy. Her husband had been unfaithful, but with Charles, she felt appreciated and understood. She valued the connection while Charles remained single, but once he got engaged, she recognized that their relationship had to come to an end. Camilla also noticed how uneasy Diana felt around her, and she respectfully stepped back. One of the biggest problems in the early days of Charles and Diana's relationship was that Charles never explained his history with Camilla. In fact, he even brought Diana to stay with the Parker Bowles family early on, without ever mentioning that Camilla had once been more than just a friend. Diana only found out later through palace gossip. She was just 19 years old at the time and felt deeply hurt and embarrassed. But that wasn't the only painful discovery. Just days before their wedding, Charles and Camilla had one last lunch together. During that meeting, Charles gave Camilla a bracelet engraved with the initials G and F, their private nicknames, believed to stand for Gladys and Fred. Diana discovered the bracelet 2 weeks before the wedding. She came across it in the office she shared with Charles's private secretary, Michael Colborne. Charles had asked Colborne to help arrange small farewell gifts for several women he'd been close to during his bachelor years. The gifts were meant as parting tokens, thanking them for their friendship. All the jewelry was delivered to Colborne's office and left on his desk. But while he was away at a meeting, Diana happened to be alone in the room. She opened the boxes. When Colborne returned, he found Diana storming out, furious. She had seen the bracelet meant for Camilla and was overcome with jealousy. Despite everything, Camilla still attended Charles and Diana's wedding. After that, however, she and Charles didn't speak or see each other for nearly 5 years, except for when Charles called to tell her about the birth of Prince William. A notice was posted outside Buckingham Palace announcing that the Princess of Wales had safely given birth to a boy at 9:03 p.m. Her Royal Highness and her child are both doing well. William was born in June 1982, less than a year after the wedding, and it marked one of the happiest times in Charles and Diana's marriage. According to Junor, friends who visited Kensington Palace during the early 1980s said the home felt joyful. Diana could often be seen running after young William, who loved hiding under Charles's desk at bedtime. She and Charles would sometimes playfully chase each other up the stairs. Diana later told journalist Andrew Morton that the period leading up to Prince Harry's birth in 1984 was the happiest time in her marriage. She truly loved being a mother. Diana loved William and Harry with everything she had. For someone who longed so deeply for love, motherhood brought her a deep sense of comfort and fulfillment. According to Penny Junor, having children was one of the best things that ever happened to Diana. Even as she flourished in her role as a mother, the tension in her marriage only continued to build. Diana's moods could be unpredictable, and she was a complex person. Junor explains that there were sides of Diana that the public never saw, things that happened behind closed doors. That's part of why many people only know her story through her own words. Andrew Morton's 1992 book, Diana, Her True Story, shaped how the world saw her. But it told only her version. Charles, on the other hand, has rarely spoken about the marriage. Apart from acknowledging his infidelity during a 1994 interview with Jonathan Dimbleby, he's largely stayed silent and has never publicly criticized Diana. Junor believes Charles genuinely tried to make Diana happy. But Diana needed constant, undivided attention, something Charles wasn't equipped to give. He was deeply committed to his royal duties, which always came first. The intense public attention Diana received also created tension, especially when it overshadowed Charles's own work. On March 20th, 1983, Charles and Diana arrived in Alice Springs, a remote town in central Australia. Reports from that time say Charles felt overshadowed by his wife's growing popularity. Junor, who had accompanied them on earlier tours, recalled a similar situation during their visit to Wales shortly after their honeymoon. Diana drew massive crowds. During walkabouts, Charles would take one side of the street while Diana took the other, but people on Charles's side often reacted with disappointment. They'd hand him flowers and ask him to give them to Diana instead. The media was just as fixated. Charles could give a heartfelt speech on the environment or his charitable efforts, but the next day's headlines would be about Diana's hairstyle, her outfit, or speculation about a possible pregnancy. Over time, this wore on him. Charles had spent his whole life being the focus, Junor notes, but now he was being pushed to the background, while his wife, often praised for superficial reasons, became the main attraction. It's no wonder, she says, that he struggled with it emotionally. Diana later told Andrew Morton that she realized her marriage was truly over when Harry was born in 1984. She was crushed by something Charles reportedly said after the birth. She admitted, "Something inside me died." By 1986, their relationship had completely broken down. Charles was in a fragile state. Two mutual friends, worried about him, reached out to Camilla separately and encouraged her to check in on him. She did, and that's how their friendship resumed. Charles saw Camilla again in 1986, when he invited her and her husband, Andrew Parker Bowles, to tea at Highgrove. According to Junior, their friendship deepened in the months that followed, and by 1987, they were romantically involved once more. Meanwhile, Andrew continued to be unfaithful to Camilla, and she felt neglected and unloved in her own marriage. By this point, Diana herself had also engaged in a few affairs. Diana's first known romantic relationship was likely with her bodyguard, Barry Manicky, followed by a more public one with James Hewitt, a retired British Army officer. By the time Charles reconnected with Camilla, he and Diana were no longer living as a true couple. By 1986, their lives had largely drifted apart, and Charles's affair with Camilla continued. After years of speculation and media pressure, British Prime Minister John Major officially announced their separation in December 1992. Then, in the summer of 1994, Charles admitted in a televised interview with journalist Jonathan Dimbleby that he had been unfaithful. He also expressed a noticeable emotional distance from both Diana and his family. According to Penny Jr., that interview played a key role in prompting Andrew Parker Bowles' eventual decision to end his marriage to Camilla. In January 1995, Camilla and Andrew publicly announced their divorce, releasing a statement calling it a private matter and attempting to minimize the impact of their past affairs. Later that same year, in November 1995, Diana gave her now famous Panorama interview with Martin Bashir, where she said the iconic line, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." Not long after the interview aired, Queen Elizabeth suggested that Charles and Diana proceed with a formal divorce. It was finalized in August 1996, after 4 years of separation. Just 1 year later, on August 31, 1997, Diana died in a car crash in Paris. She was 36 years old. Charles and Camilla made their first official public appearance as a couple in January 1999. Their engagement was announced on February 10, 2005, and they were married a few months later on April 9th in a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall. The ceremony was followed by a blessing at St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. To fully understand the man at the center of all this, the king, the husband, the father, we have to go back to the very beginning. Charles was born on November 14, 1948, during the reign of his grandfather, King George VI. He was the first child of Princess Elizabeth, then Duchess of Edinburgh, later Queen Elizabeth II, and Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Charles was delivered by cesarean section at Buckingham Palace and was christened Charles Philip Arthur George on December 15, 1948, in the palace's music room by the Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher. When King George VI passed away on February 6, 1952, Charles's mother became Queen Elizabeth II, and Charles became heir to the throne. As the monarch's eldest son, he was granted traditional titles, Duke of Cornwall, and in Scotland, Duke of Rothesay, Earl of Carrick, Baron of Renfrew, Lord of the Isles, and Prince and Great Steward of Scotland. The following year, he attended his mother's coronation at Westminster Abbey. Charles began his education at age 5 with a governess, Catherine Peebles, who taught him inside Buckingham Palace. Then, in November 1956, he began attending Hill House School in London, making him the first heir to the British throne to be educated outside the palace, rather than solely by private tutors. At Hill House, Charles wasn't given any special treatment. The headmaster insisted that he play sports, like football, alongside the other boys, emphasizing that no one should show favoritism toward him. He continued his education at 2 schools previously attended by his father. From 1958 to 1962, Charles studied at Cheam School in Hampshire and then at Gordonstoun in Scotland, a school known for its demanding curriculum and strict discipline. Despite describing his experience there as tough and even admitting he was bullied, Charles later spoke positively about Gordonstoun, saying it helped him learn a great deal about himself and his strengths. He eventually became the school's patron in 2024. In 1966, he spent time studying at the Timbertop campus of Geelong Grammar School in Australia. He enjoyed his time there, including a school trip to Papua New Guinea. Charles would later say that Timbertop was the happiest chapter of his school years. Back at Gordonstoun, he followed in his father's footsteps and was named head boy. By 1967, he had completed 6 O-levels and earned 2 A-levels in history and French. Breaking with royal tradition, Charles chose to go to university instead of immediately joining the military. In October 1967, he enrolled at Trinity College, Cambridge, where he studied archaeology, anthropology, and history. He made headlines as the future King of England stepping into life as a college freshman. Lord Butler, the Master of Trinity, announced Charles's major focus on archaeology and anthropology. He graduated in June 1970 with a Bachelor of Arts degree, which was later upgraded to a Master of Arts in 1975. Charles was named Prince of Wales and Earl of Chester on July 26, 1958, but his formal investiture didn't take place until July 1, 1969. That ceremony, held at Caernarfon Castle and televised across the country, stirred some controversy in Wales due to growing nationalist sentiment. Afterward, Charles began taking on more official duties. In 1974, he gave his first speech in the House of Lords, the first royal to do so since Edward VII in 1884. In 1976, he launched the Prince's Trust, a charitable foundation, and his role as a public figure continued to expand. He even visited the United States in 1981. Although Charles expressed interest in becoming Governor-General of Australia during the 1970s, the idea never moved forward due to lack of public support. Throughout the 1970s, Charles also served in both the Royal Air Force and Royal Navy. His military journey began in 1969 during his second year at Cambridge, when he trained with the Cambridge University Air Squadron and learned to fly a Chipmunk aircraft. He earned his RAF wings in August 1971. After that, he transitioned to naval training, completing a 6-week course at the Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. His final naval post came in 1976, when he served as commanding officer of the coastal minehunter HMS Bronington. He ended his active military service later that year with the rank of commander. Charles stopped flying altogether after a 1994 incident in Iceland involving a BAE 146 aircraft. Though he was a guest in the cockpit and not piloting the plane, he had been invited to handle the controls. A subsequent inquiry found the flight crew at fault for negligence. Charles made his first public appearance back in 1965, attending a student garden party at Holyrood House in Edinburgh. As Prince of Wales, he went on to represent the Queen at thousands of events. Between 2002 and 2022 alone, he carried out 10,934 public engagements, attended official ceremonies, presided over investitures, and represented the monarchy at the funerals of global leaders. He also made regular visits to Wales, especially during the summer, where he took part in key national events such as the opening of the Senedd, Welsh Parliament. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away on September 8, 2022, Charles automatically became king, ending the longest wait for the throne in British history. At age 73, he became the oldest person to ascend to the British throne, breaking the previous record set by William IV, who was 64 when he became king in 1830. On September 9, 2022, Charles delivered his first speech as monarch, honoring his mother's legacy and officially naming his eldest son, William, the new Prince of Wales. The following day, he was formally declared king in a historic televised ceremony by the Accession Council, the first time the event had ever been broadcast. Across the UK and throughout the Commonwealth, local officials read the proclamation of the new king. Charles and Camilla's coronation was held on May 6, 2023, at Westminster Abbey. The event, codenamed Operation Golden Orb, was designed to be shorter and more modest than Queen Elizabeth's 1953 coronation. It reflected Charles's vision of a modern, inclusive Britain, one shaped by diversity and social progress. After decades of personal struggles, public criticism, and media scandal, Charles and Camilla finally stood side by side, crowned, united, and leading a new chapter in the monarchy's story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave a comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content. Be sure to check out the next video popping up on your screen. You won't want to miss it.